we've reached the end of the sort of conversations about the Middle Ages, and the exact end to when the Middle Ages is something that's always open to dispute amongst historians. But I just want to close here this section by taking a look at a couple of different trends that are vital to understand as we're about to go into a more modern Europe that's going to have some other challenges to it. And one is to continue to note that what's going to happen is that most states are going to be centralizing power under one royal family. That the legal systems, economic, social, and political systems are all going to be going to the top, that there's going to be a centralized authority of a royal family, almost always male, but nonetheless sometimes female, that will try to project power from the top down, organize better tax systems, organize centralized armies, protection, diplomacy. In other words, the modern trappings of a state that we would recognize as a separate nation or country or realm, depending on what term they want to use, we're getting to the time period where that early feudalism we talked about a while ago, that decentralized, fragmentized time period of, say, the 9th and 10th centuries, the era, say, before Charlemagne, that too, Europe had been broken into massive little pieces. And now, over time, over centuries, royal families, through warfare, through dynastic inheritance, through wise family decisions in terms of marrying heiresses to heirs, consolidating land, consolidating power, these are the states now that are in a position in the late Middle Ages to succeed at the next level, whether it be military or otherwise. And the three most important ones for us to take a look at will be England, that increasingly is going to be taking control over the areas and expanding into Scottish territory. It will, of course, be eventually removed, but nonetheless, that struggle over the border. There's also English domination of Wales by the 14th century and large chunks of Ireland by then as well. And that England now is going to have that central monarchy that is going to have the power and the drive in many ways to try and consolidate and control as best they can their people, their tax bases, and increasingly trade. And we'll be talking more about trade in the next couple of lectures here. Those cities with their guilds that are protecting their economic interests, the people who are living and working in different places inside these communes that we know from the late Middle Ages. They are forming their own communities, their own independent governments at the cost of having to buy it from the local lords, but nonetheless. In France, we have also the same trend. The French family, the Capetians, had been based in Paris up until their die-off in 1328. They had tried to expand their power outwards. The Valois family that now takes over, they're going to continue to try and expand that control, and by the end of the Hundred Years' War, by about 1453, have been largely successful in creating what is starting to look like a modern-day France. The borders are still not quite adjusted, but the idea is there, that there is a central authority in Paris, and that in many ways that central authority will exert itself in many ways, military, political, and legal, across this realm that's growing. The last of the medieval states that we want to take a look at for a second is Spain. We're going to take a look at the rise of the Spanish area. Iberia, the continent of Europe, remember, ends in Iberia. That's the peninsula that we consider Portugal and modern-day Spain, is made up of a whole bunch of different little kingdoms of different kinds, Castile and Leon and Aragon. And over time, what's happening is through the Reconquista, right? The Christian reconquest process of taking back territory in Spain and Portugal is opening up opportunities for the royal families to consolidate their power, demonstrate their power militarily. And what's happening is now in Iberia, from 711, from the original invasion of the Muslims, until 1492, the story of much of Spanish and Portuguese history will be that history of religious consolidation as the Christian church increasingly takes back territory, and then what they're going to do with the Muslim and Jewish minorities in those areas, that's going to be another key element you'll be reading about, all right? The other thing that had challenged Europe is that there was great Christian disunity. There had been, since the amalgamation of the powers of the papacy, great diversity and interpretation of everything about the exact meaning of the Last Supper within the Christian movement, relationships with Muslims and Jews, relationships with even Eastern Orthodox Christians. Lots and lots of division about different interpretations of theology over most of the time period of the Middle Ages, they stay unified, but there are some cracks there. There are some cracks between interpretations about what's proper or improper. There's some different interpretations within popular piety, and when they're talking about what they're trying to do in individual parishes. And then, of course, there's the political and other issues at the top, the levels of the bishops, archbishops, and papacy. There are some cracks that will be developing, and they will be expanding as we go into the Reformation era. We also have a change in the economic system. There is an increase in trade. Those cities that have been forming over the course of the Middle Ages, that have gotten their independence from their local landlords and churchmen, running their own sort of economic activities. The guilds, the groups of people who run those cities, are creating essentially a form of monopoly for themselves. They very carefully control who else can sell goods in the city, for what price. They control each other in the sense that these guilds are very protective of making sure that there's not too many people involved in selling goods in the city. They really are good at keeping their independence as best they can in controlling the business activity. All right? What's also happening is something like the Hanseatic League, or Venice, or England. These are three major economic powers of the late Middle Ages that are having the ability to go out and have a large trade network that will in many ways be a valuable way to move goods and services, but also there's a necessity there of banking and credit, growing ideas of joint stock companies and sharing the burden in having an overseas exercise like a trade commission or sending off a trader. There's lots of ways in which for us to look at this, but the Venetians are increasingly controlling lots of things in the Mediterranean. The English are getting more and more adventuresome in controlling sea lanes. The Dutch will be rising later on as we go into the more modern era. And of course the Hanseatic League, which is one of the more famous of the trade networks, and it had controlled most of Northern European trade. And this is sort of a recreation of the trade route. As we'd mentioned earlier with the rise of Muscovy, under the control of the Mongols, there was a trade network that took lots of Russian products down the river to the Black Sea and out that way towards the Mediterranean. There'd also been significant trade from the northern part of Russia through the city of Novgorod that we mentioned in one of our earlier lectures, and from there out into the sea lanes and to the major cities across Europe and across the Baltic, all the way, of course, to London. This was a vital trade network called the Hanseatic League. It was one of the ways in which much trade was done. We had already talked about briefly the trade that was done in the area of the Silk Road. In southern part of the Europeans, that's where many of their trade networks go. This is the northern component. The Hanseatic League will last for a couple more centuries, but it will increasingly die out, in part because the ability of the French, the Dutch, the English, and others, Portuguese too, to tap into the trade network and control of what you will know as the Atlantic Ocean. All right? So as we're closing the Middle Ages here, Europe is challenged by many different things: changes in trade, changes in religion, changes in the economy, agricultural production, and is now at a stage where it could be launching into a very different understanding of how to operate in the world, and that's why we're heading into the early modern era. Make sure you read about the latter Middle Ages as we pull together many of these key concepts inside the readings that you have. And then, of course, take a look and see if some of the sample questions can address some of these issues.